Buddy, today we are jumping into our first day of Unit 8, Day 1, which is going to have us talking a little bit about the end of World War II, but also about Truman and the Cold War. So, post-war America, what did the United States look like after the war? You'd have 15 million American soldiers that would return from civilian life in 1945 to 46 and would be looking for jobs. You're going to see, as a result of the war effort, and because so many people could not spend money on like perishable item, not perishable, on other material type items and that kind of thing, Americans had actually built up a good amount of savings during this time because of not being able to purchase. Think about it. People hadn't been able to purchase cars and other things as well because we were trying to save everything with the war effort. So because of this pent up demand for cars and housing and a lot of different factors, you're going to see an era of unprecedented prosperity and economic growth during this time. And by the 1950s, the Americans are going to enjoy the highest standard of living in the world. Now, one of the big things that helps push that is the GI Bill of 1944, and that's what it's popularly known as. It was called the Servicemen's Readjustment Act of 1944, and really the purpose of this was to help GIs to transition back into society and provide them some tools to be able to do so. So you'd see that there would be 2 million veterans attend college under the GI Bill, and you would have $16 billion dispersed in low-interest government-backed loans to help buy homes, farms, and to start businesses. If the military is something you would be interested in joining today, there actually is still the GI Bill available today, so that if you do serve in the military, that you can be able to go to college under the GI Bill and that kind of thing. So again, this was made as a way to help out GIs as they came back and were transitioning back into society. Also during this period, you would see the period of the baby boom. Men had been off fighting in war for a long time. They come back, and then you're going to have this explosion in the number of marriages and births after World War II. Between 1945 and 1960, you would have 50 million babies born. So a lot of babies born during this time. And you can see there on the chart the birth rate during this period and how it does shoot up and grow a lot. And this is why this is known as the baby boom generation, because again, these are the children of these World War II veterans and other people from World War II. Again, hadn't been having children, they come back and they could. Now, the baby boom generation would have a profound effect on the nation's social institutions and economic life later in the 20th century. And we'll get more into talking about that once we talk about things like Social Security and other facets of life. And again, this is going to be the generation, many of them, growing up in the 1960s during the counterculture movement and that kind of thing. So again, baby boomers are going to have a profound movement, a profound effect, and you can even say they have a profound effect today. Now, while more women did work after World War II, again, you're going to see primarily women. It was seen as their role to stay home and to focus on helping to raise the children. Also during this time, you would see the growth of the suburbs. Now, we mentioned veterans coming home and being able to get these low interest loans to be able to buy or purchase a home. So William J. Levitt, he would be the leader in this development of a post-war suburbia about building and promoting what he called Levitt towns. There would be a specific Levitt town. Actually, they would name the places Levitt towns in some places. But the model one was in Long Island, New York, and you would have 17,000 mass-produced, low-priced family homes. Again, a lot of families were able, under the GI Bill, to get low-interest loans and other types of low-interest loans as well, which made the move from the city to the suburbs affordable for many. Now, the negative effect on this would be, of course, on cities. It would be pretty disastrous for cities because, again, the cities would become increasingly poor because those were the people that often didn't have the means to buy their own home, and more racially divided, again, because a lot of these people moving out to the suburbs were generally white, where your African Americans stayed in the city. So in some ways, it led to more division within our society. But a lot of people viewed it as good because, again, people were out. They could own a home and a piece of land now. And to a lot of people, that was symbolic of what would be known as the American dream. You'd also have the rise of the Sun Belt. We mentioned this a little bit in our last unit, but Millions of Americans would move into these Sunbelt states, which is the area there in red on the map, due to warmer climate, lower taxes, and also the economic opportunities in defense-related industries. This is something that had picked up during World War II and would really explode in the period after World War II. And this also would mean, with more population in these areas, greater political power for the South and West, because that would increase the representation in Congress and so forth. All right, so when you're looking at politics in the post-war, of course, you have Harry Truman, who was president during this time. He was known as a moderate Democrat. He would become a pretty decisive leader during his time as a president, and he was known for being very honest and unpretentious. And he would actually continue a lot of the programs that FDR had set up under the New Deal. And again, a lot of people just looked at Truman, kind of more of an average guy. Again, he was from the Midwest. I believe Missouri is where he was from. And he kind of had this kind of just like down home type of feeling that a lot of people did like. Now, as far as his economic policies, he would push the passage of the Employment Act of 1946. And through this, you're going to see that Truman had tried to push a lot of very progressive social policies kind of coming out of the New Deal. One of the things would be a national health insurance, minimum wage, and a full employment bill. Now, again, remember, he has to work with Congress in this. So the result is he's not going to get all those things that he wants in that bill. What comes down is a really watered down version of the bill compared to what he wanted to do. And really what this Employment Act of 1946 eventually did was created the Council of Economic Advisors to help counsel both the president and Congress on economics and affairs and what exactly to do. Now, you will see the World War II, the price and wage controls that had been in place during World War II, those would be ended, which would lead to strikes in railroad and mine workers during that time. Truman is going to take a very tough approach on the mine workers by actually seizing the mines and using soldiers to keep the mines operating until the strike ended. So you see, again, he was willing to deal tough with the unions and others if he had to. Also, Truman and civil rights. He would use his executive powers to establish the Committee on Civil Rights in 1946 and would also help strengthen up the Justice Department in the area of civil rights. In 1948, he would bring an end to a segregation of the armed forces. So no longer would the military be split between black and white. That would be ended. Also, he tried to end that in the federal government as well. And he would push Congress for more legislation to deal with other areas, such as preventing employers from discriminating based on race and that kind of thing. That legislation would actually be blocked by Democrats in Congress. But really, the big thing that he was able to do is in the segregation of the military forces. So when we talk about the Korean War, and realize with the Korean War that would be the first war the United States would fight with a truly desegregated military. Now, the 80th Congress, which was under Republican control, again, remember that Truman is a Democrat, and they would have a couple big reforms themselves. One would be the 22nd Amendment passed in 1951, which limits the president to a maximum of 2 full terms in office. Now, that is an amendment that is part of our Constitution. Remember, that had been the tradition all the way up until FDR, and then FDR decided to run 4 times. Also, you would have the passage of the Taft-Hartley Act, which was created to limit the power of organized labor during this time. And a lot of things that had been like really pushed by progressives earlier on in the century would be undone with this. Like it outlawed the idea of a closed shop, permitted states to pass right to work laws, outlawed secondary boycotts, gave the president power to invoke an 80-day cooling off period before a strike if it was considered something of national safety would be effect if people struck. So think about like to the 1920s when Coolidge, how he dealt with the police strike during that time. That's what it was made for during this time. Really the big thing being the 22nd Amendment and limiting a president to 2 terms. Now, that brings us to the election of 1948. And you're going to see that because of Truman and the type of person he was in his policies, that both the liberal and conservative factions of the Democratic Party didn't really like him very much. So they created their own parties. The Progressive Party, again, kind of going back, with Henry Wallace, they didn't like Truman's aggressive foreign policy. And then you had the States' Rights Party, which became known as the Dixiecrats. They would nominate Strom Thurmond, and they left the party because of Truman's support for civil rights legislation. Now, the Republicans would nominate Thomas E. Dewey, and most assumed that he would win because of the split in the Democratic National Convention. And if you think about it, if you look at the U.S. through history, whenever a party tends to break into factions like this, usually that party does not win the election. Think about the election of 1860, and that you had the Democratic Party run 4 different candidates, and that is what led to Abraham Lincoln winning. Now, you could say because of some of his confidence and that he was going to have an easy victory, you would see Dewey did very little campaigning during this time, while Truman traveled extensively around the country doing speeches. He would earn the nickname "Give 'em Hell Harry" during this time period because of the strong speeches that he would give as he traveled around the country during this time. So, and probably one of the biggest election surprises of anybody. Again, everybody had really assumed that Truman was going to lose the election, and would you look at it, he wins the election there Again, he doesn't get the majority of the vote, but he gets a plurality of the vote with 49.5%. And you have this very famous picture here. The Chicago Tribune had already printed their newspaper saying Dewey defeats Truman. And of course, Truman would win, again, creating this very famous picture of him holding up that newspaper headline. So Truman would launch his own program, and it would be known as the Fair Deal. Again, trying to give more Americans, try to be more fair, and ensuring a fair and equal playing ground as well. So he would urge Congress once again to pass national health insurance, to give more money to education, civil rights legislation, more funds for public housing, and a new farm program. Now, you will see, again, he was dealing with a Republican Congress during this time. They would block most of the reforms. They would expand, though, minimum wage and Social Security as well. And again, most of these bills are going to be defeated, and because of the conflicts they had with Congress, not with just the Republican Party, but within his own party, but also the concerns of the Cold War are going to grow more pressing for Truman during this time. So we're talking about post-war outcomes and the origin of the Cold War. And really, what were things looking like between the U.S. and the Soviet Union at the end of World War II? All right, so some post-war outcomes. You are going to see a reshaping of political boundaries within Europe. Of course, Germany had an extensive amount of territory that they had taken before and then during World War II, and that would have to be redistributed and split back up as it was. Now, the big change that you are going to see again is that Germany is going to be partitioned into East and West Germany. West Germany would be the democratic part of Germany. East Germany is going to be the communist side of that. Also, the city of Berlin was split up into 4 different parts, which is interesting because it's hard to see on this map, but Berlin was smack dab in the middle of East Germany. Also, the Soviets would occupy most of Eastern and Central Europe and East Germany as well. So it's kind of hard, again, to see on that map, but you can see all the areas that are dark there. Those are all the areas of Soviet influence. 2, democratic Japan. Japan would be occupied by American forces, and they would adopt the democratic form of government. General Douglas MacArthur would stay over there in Japan to help do that and help transition them back into having a self-government. Of course, Japan would become a very strong ally of the United States. You'd also have the creations of the United Nations and the Security Council, which is made up of 5 permanent members. The United States would be made a member of that Security Council. Now, you're going to see with the end of World War II, again, some conflict had already started to bubble up even before the end of the war. We talked about at the end of World War II how the Soviets were supposed to help us in Japan, and they didn't really get into the war till it was basically over with Japan. So you are going to see building conflict. Now, I do have a scene here for you from Star Wars to kind of check out. This is the fight scene between Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker here. And I always show this, and then we discuss it as a class. What does this have to do with the Cold War? And you will see a lot of allusions to Star Wars and some of the some people using it as symbolism for the Cold War, which in a lot of ways it was. It's got this idea of this evil empire against the Republic, which is supposed to be the good side in that. And there are a lot of parallels that you can make between the two sides. So check out that scene and see if you can think of any parallels between Star Wars and the Cold War. Ronald Reagan would give a very famous speech, and then I'm not sure if we're going to be reading it or not, I haven't decided. But in this speech, he would actually call the Soviet Union the evil empire. And again, you could say that's a reference to the idea of Star Wars and the evil empire there. So, Cold War itself, it would last from the end of World War II until the collapse of the Soviet Union, which would be officially 1991. So we are getting to events now that are within my time of being alive. Ideological and national concerns led to the Cold War. Of course, the difference between a democratic country and a communist country. And you're going to see that the Cold War would have a big influence in a lot of different ways. It would influence U.S. culture, military, foreign policy, even presidential elections as well. Because as president, a lot of people judge you based on your stand on the Cold War and how you would go about handling the Soviet Union. So, Americans had really distrusted Soviets since the communist takeover of Russia. And you're going to see that during World War II, really that we worked together more out of convenience, not because that there was a mutual trust between the two sides. FDR had hoped that by working with Stalin personally, it would help to keep the Soviets in check. Again, he hoped that them having a working relationship together would help change that. Truman, though, was very, very suspicious of the Soviets and had zero trust for them at all. Also, during the same time, this early time period here, you would see the Soviets would reject the Baruch Plan, which would regulate nuclear energy and eliminate atomic bombs. And because of them rejecting that, again, that got a lot of Americans concerned and very suspicious of them, saying, hey, why wouldn't they want to pass this? Does this mean they're making nuclear weapons, possibly to use on us or somewhere else in the world? So this distrust would eventually turn to hostility between the two sides. Soviet forces, they would remain in Central and Eastern Europe, holding manipulated elections in favor of communist candidates. So again, I told you that one of the promises that they had made is that there would be free and fair elections in Eastern Europe after World War II. And really, again, they were manipulated elections. They were not fair, and basically it was rigged so that the communist candidates would be able to win in that. And a lot of people in the U.S. and Britain saw this as a violation of self-determination, genuine democracy, and open markets. They said, look, what you're doing, you're not fooling us. We know the game that you're playing. We know that you have organized and made it so that the communists would win in these elections. And so as a result of the communists winning the elections, you're going to see the Soviets would tighten down control, not over just Eastern Europe, but also Eastern Germany as well. Now, Truman, again, gets very, very frustrated. And like I said, this definitely turns to hostility. And he says, I'm tired of babying the Soviets. Basically, I'm tired of dealing with this. And then Winston Churchill, he would give his Iron Curtain speech, and in that he would say, an Iron Curtain has descended across the continent of Europe. Again, Iron Curtain being that separation between communist Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union and free Western Europe. And in this speech, Winston Churchill would call for the Western democracies to work together to hopefully help halt the expansion of communism. So, with this, you're going to see the creation of the containment theory, which would be our policy throughout the Cold War. This would be formulated by U.S. diplomat George F. Kennan, George Marshall, and Dean Acheson. You will see that Kennan gets a lot of the credit for creating the containment theory. And basically, this was the idea. It says a long-term, patient, but first and vigilant containment of Russian expansive tendencies would cause the Soviets to back off. So the goal of this was to prevent the spread of communism and communist aggression. And again, they weren't trying to, it wasn't, hey, we're going to march into and destroy communism in the Soviet Union. It was not that. It was the idea of, hey, we would just want to stop the spread of communism. So keep it from going anywhere else. Hopefully by containing it, we'd be able to control it and maybe even lead to the death of communism. You can see these political cartoons here. Again, why people viewed a lot of things this way with the containment theory and the idea later on of the domino theory that if one country were to fall to communism, more would. This one right here, this red iceberg here, you see the U.S. headed towards the iceberg and all these other countries that had already fallen to communism. And then the one here at the top, the Soviet Union being represented as a bear there, trying to spread its influence throughout the world. So, with that, you will have the Truman Doctrine, and this was Truman's specific view of countering geopolitical expansion during the Cold War. And basically, again, he wanted to be able to help out nations to prevent them from hopefully falling to communism. Now, this didn't necessarily mean military, but also it could have meant financially as well, to help communism not look as alluring, because as we will see, when economies worsen over in Europe, that's when it's going to be that they're more inclined to falling to communism. So Greece and Turkey had both been struggling during this time. Greece was dealing with a communist uprising, and the Soviets were trying to strong arm Turkey to get a water route there in the Mediterranean. So Truman would ask Congress in March of 1947 for $400 million in economic and military aid to assist the free people of Greece and Turkey. And this would actually be successful. Greece and Turkey would not fall to communism, and it was seen as this is the Truman Doctrine, and it's actually working. Because we put money into those two places, it helped stop the communist uprising and also helped Turkey to take control of that situation. Also with this, it was seen because of the bad shape that Europe was in that we needed to do more to help out the countries in Europe. So as a result of all that going on, again, Europe being in bad shape, you're going to see there was growing and encouraging growth of the Communist Party. And because of that, our concern becomes how can we help them out so that they don't fall to communism? So June 1947, George Marshall, he comes up with this program, which again would bear his name, the Marshall Plan of Economic Aid to help out European nations and help them to revive their economy. So you see there, $12 billion in aid would be approved for distribution to the countries of Western Europe. We would also offer the trade to the USSR and its states, but they declined. Again, we knew they were going to decline in that, but it was seen as a way to be like, hey, we're not just helping out the democratic countries. We offered you help and you turned it down. Also, the Soviet Union would be worried, too, that if we started helping out, that what might happen to countries in Eastern Europe, that maybe they would decide they didn't actually like communism. So this plan would be successful as Western European economies would rebound and the threat of communist political takeovers and successes would end in that area. So again, the Marshall Plan would be very successful in helping rebuild Western Germany as well as other countries there. You can see some political cartoons here with the Marshall Plan. The one there, that is Stalin. He's actually jumping up to block that ball. The ball is the Marshall Plan and going into European recovery. Again, the viewpoint that he wouldn't have liked the Marshall Plan. And then the other one over here, which is a little hard to read, it says it's the same thing without mechanical problems. Shows the Marshall Plan there, the farmer, everything looks great. And then the Marshall-Stalin Plan on the other side, where you have the people being treated terribly. All right, so what would be the effect of the Cold War specifically on the Commonwealth of Virginia? Well, you're going to have a lot of heavy military expenditures throughout the Cold War, and they would benefit Virginia in many ways, and in a lot of ways more than any other states. In Hampton Roads, there would be you have naval bases there that have existed since before the Revolutionary War. Those would grow and be expanded. Also, Air Force bases there. In Northern Virginia, you would have the Pentagon and lots of privately owned contract defense companies. If you've ever been into Northern Virginia, I encourage you, if you go to Arlington, on the other side of the Potomac River from Washington, D.C., you'll see lots of tall buildings over there, and many of them are defense contractors, again, in close proximity to the Pentagon there. So the Cold War would have a good effect on the economy of Virginia. Now, you will see that during this time that there is going to be made a lot of emphasis, again, on educating Americans about democracy and communism and the dangers of communism. This is an example of one of these cartoons. This one, I believe, was made by Harding College and in 1948 called Make Mine Freedom. And the whole purpose of this was, again, to help educate Americans of the dangers of communism. Again, I encourage you to check that out. All right, so that's it for today, talking about Truman and that. Again, we're going to jump farther into the Cold War next class and specifically look at events during Truman's presidency and what exactly that's going to happen. We're also going to be looking at President Eisenhower as well and his administration and his policies. So throughout us going through the whole Cold War, you're going to see a lot of focus on presidents and their specific policies and what those policies are in relation here domestically, but really in foreign policy, because for every Cold War president, that is going to be a major part of their presidency is how do you deal with the Soviet Union and the Cold War. So I hope you have a great day.